Now, he gives this with a clear illustration in verses 2 to 4 back in James chapter 2. And he's going to contrast the rich and the poor. Because in this context, the readers, a lot of them are poor now because they are victims of persecution from Acts chapter 8. They have already spread out from Jerusalem. They probably lost their property. They've probably been excommunicated from their community already. But for some reason, because maybe some of them used to hang out with the rich because they're rich, or maybe some of them always looked up to the rich, they still wanted to aspire to want to be rich and influential like the Pharisees. And so he uses that example here. He says, for if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing also comes in, and if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing and say, you sit here in a good place, while you say to the poor man, you stand over there or sit down at my feet. Have you not then made, what is the word here? Distinctions. Do you see that? That's what favoritism is. You look, you judge, and you make an action based on that. Distinctions amongst yourselves and become judges with what? Evil thoughts. There it is. You weren't making distinction based on actual information that is true. You're not making a distinction based on the actual character of the people. That this person is trustworthy, this person... You look at the superficial thing of wealth, and you treat people differently based on that. Now, here's why James seems to always say something negative about the rich in this letter. Do you notice that? He doesn't say one positive thing. Because how did James grow up? Was he rich growing up? No. He was not. He saw up close how poor people were treated. His parents were poor. They couldn't afford an animal, a sheep. They had to do turtle doves. His brother, older brother, the most important person in the world, he was poor. Remember Jesus says, I don't have a place to lie down my head, and you're asking if you can go do this before you follow me? Jesus wasn't rich. He wasn't rich. And so don't you think James had a front row seat seeing how the rich were treated, the respected and powerful were treated in light of the poor people that he was around? And the worst thing is, this is one thing for the world to value the rich and devalue the poor. We expect the world to do that. But what did he just say before? Those who have living faith are what? People who don't think like the world. Remember he just said that? And what is the one thing that the world tends to do? They have a Forbes 100, the 100 richest people in the world. I've never seen a Forbes 100, the poorest people in the world. I've seen interviews of Mark Cuban all over the place. I've never seen an interview of a Dickies worker. Because why? We value what? If you are wealthy, we assume there's a good attribute to that. We assume that person accomplished something. We attribute positive attributes to a person who, quote unquote, built a big business, don't we? Oh, Elon Musk, he's just so smart. He knows what he's doing. He must, because he's a rich man. Says who? He's a fool, according to the Bible, because he doesn't know God. So why do you want to be like a fool? Why don't you look up to a godly person who's poor versus an ungodly person who's rich? Do you not see how what we get drawn towards or gravitated toward? Now, it's one thing if the world does that, James is saying. But he just said, you're not supposed to think like the world. So he uses the context of an assembly. Let's use the church. Imagine Elon Musk or Mark Cuban walks in. How would our church react? How would you react? Can I get a selfie? Can I put this? Oh, whoa. Oh, can we get 10% of your income? That will fund us for the next 20 years, right? Oh, here, meet the pastor, meet this. Okay, it's okay to show honor to people who are wealthy and rich, but here's James's question. Would you show the same honor and attention to someone who was poor who walked in the same door? If you're willing to sit next to Mark Cuban, have a talk with him, have a selfie with him, want him to know our budget and give 10% of his income, would you do that to a person who comes in and just doesn't look like they have shoes on or smells because they can't afford having a place with running water? Do you see how evil it is the minute we make distinctions in our own minds? And here's what James is saying. God doesn't view people that way at all. Remember what we said about King David when he was chosen? What did the narrator say? The author say God doesn't look at the outward appearance, but the what? Internal. So we worship a God and we claim to say, we know God, we know his word, we have received God's word. Yet why are we looking at external factors and distinctions in how we treat people? When you show favoritism, especially to the rich, it doesn't make sense of your reality. So here's how James is going to set that up. Look at verses 5 through 7. Listen, my beloved brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he has promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Are not the rich the ones who oppress you and the ones who drag you into court? Are they not the ones who blaspheme the honorable name in which you are called? So James gives 3 rhetorical questions, which are actually statements, and these questions expect a positive answer, right? So these are self-implied questions. He's not really asking questions. He's making an argument with each of these questions. And so here's what the first question he brings up. Has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom? In other words, he's contrasting a poor Christian versus a rich unbeliever. And he's saying, in light of your reality as a Christian, who is going to be your heir in the kingdom? Who is going to be your sibling in the kingdom? Who are you going to see forever for all time one day? Mark Cuban or that poor believer next to you? So does it make sense to show honor to a random stranger you're never going to be with in eternity versus a family member that is in the family of God? Do you see that argument? Like, why would you show more honor to a stranger than to your own mother, let's say? Why would you show more honor to a billionaire than your own father? But yet that is what you are doing when you treat a poor unbeliever and dismiss them, ignore them at the expense of looking at the rich. Second question. Are not the rich the ones who oppress you and the ones who drag you into court? Now, during this time, most Christians were poor, especially the Jewish Christians here who have been persecuted. And the way a lot of them became poor, actually, was that the rich landowners would lease out a piece of their land for them to farm on. But what happened was that the rich landowners would charge this exorbitant interest rates, knowing that they cannot pay it back, so that whatever they sublease to them, they can make them an indentured servant to them at some point, right? So it was the idea of like extortion or giving a payday lender loan in that sense. They were giving these crazy interest rates that they knew they couldn't pay back, and so they would be more and more indebted to them. Now, there are times where some rich people would just literally just take land from those. And what they would do is they would bribe the judges to always rule in their favor in those cases, right? We see this even in the Old Testament, like Naboth's vineyard, right? Like people just come and just take your vineyard. That's what evil people do, like the evil rich. So he is saying, you guys know the reality you're living in. You don't live in a just system. You know, like the rich weren't all there who just earned it. They were taking it, exploiting you and abusing you in the process, bribing the courts and all these things. And yet, why do you show them honor versus those who are like you have experienced oppression at their hands? Why do you look up to the powerful, let's say use modern day version, powerful politicians when they just use you like pawns in the end to get your vote? Do you see the illogicalness it is for us to look up to people in power and privilege and riches when they don't look at you the same way? There's a quote I read where it said, 20 years from now, the only people that remember that you worked late that you worked late and stayed late and worked really hard are going to be your kids. No one in your company is going to remember that. After my dad passed away, they didn't stop. The company just rehired within 2 weeks. Moving on. Because why? You're just a cog. I'm not trying to be a communist and like, oh, go overthrow the, But that's the reality. You're not important to the people who are the owners of the, right? So why are we looking up to them? Do you see James's point? Why do you care so much about them when they're not thinking twice about you? Third question. Then he gets to the knockout blow. Are they not the ones who blaspheme the honorable name by which you are called? Now, which name is he talking about? The name of his brother. So he's saying, typically, during his time, and even today, typically, the very wealthy and the powerful, those who bribe the courts and game the system, they don't love Jesus. So why in the world are you aspiring and looking up to a person who doesn't love Jesus if, quote unquote, Jesus is the most important person in your life? If they're blaspheming the most important person in your life, why would you look up to that person? I hope it's not shocking. Like, what do you have in common if you don't have the most important person in common? It's going to be very hard to respect somebody who hates the most important person in your life. And yet these poor Christians are looking up to the rich who hate Jesus. How does that make sense? Especially for James, this is personal. He's like, this is my brother too. I've seen what he cared for the poor. He's the one that took care of you. He fed you. He healed you. The Pharisees didn't lift a finger for you guys, yet you keep looking up to the Pharisees and those rich and that person And you don't look up to people who are followers of my brother? How does that make sense of your reality?